Agenda updates. I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Present. Mr. Kelly. Here. Mr. McDonald. Present. Mr. Neighbors. Present. Mrs. Red. Present. Mr. Salgado. Present. Mr. Schultz. Here. Mr. Tassoni. Present. Mr. Webster. Here. Mr. Westcott. Present. Mr. Arena. Here. Mr. Billich. Here. Mr. Boomer. Mr. Booker. Mr. Butita. Here. Mrs. Crosby. Here. Mr. Fellers. Here. Mr. Fiducia. Here. Mr. Girl. 20 present. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will ask everybody to stand for the invocation and pledge, and I'll turn things over to Mr. Girl. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are gathered before you seeking your advice, your wisdom, and your all-knowing power. We ask that you instill down upon us the strength and the power to come together as one as we face the problems that are in front of us, not only today but in the future. And we ask that you lay down your hand and protect the men and women that serve us, especially our two local delegation elected officials that will soon be joining the Guard. And we pray and we ask for your advice in these things. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nice job.
Thank you very much. Nice job, Mr. Girl. We have no awards or proclamations this evening. We'll move on to public comment. Before I call up our first speaker, just as a matter of practice, please wait to be called on by the chair to speak. You'll have your time. Thank the chair when you get that, when you get the floor, and at the end, I will thank you very kindly for sharing your thoughts tonight. Our first speaker this evening from comments from the community is Michael O'Toole. He's coming to talk general public government. And Mr. O'Toole, come on up. As he comes up, I'll read the disclaimer. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which are pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be discussed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. Mr. O'Toole, thank you very much for joining us, and you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, County Board members. I brought different hats that I wear in life. My winter cap keeps me warm. My America cap showing my pride in America. My most recent one, Ice Hawks fan. I had to think about what cap I wanted to wear tonight to address all of you that I consider professionals. So I'm wearing what's called my Mama Papa's cap. I grew up in a single parent household, and sometimes my mama would say, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy. In some households, there might have been Papa saying, if Papa's not happy, nobody's happy. I'm Mama, and I'm Papa tonight, and I'm not happy. I'm not happy with the turmoil that I read about in the newspapers, as reported also by the local television stations. I know I signed this document called 815 Civility, a nonprofit organization here in Winnebago County. I'm assuming some of you probably did also. I don't have to agree when you communicate to me, but I do need to show you respect to listen, to understand what you are telling me, just as you are doing with me tonight, and I will appreciate that amount of respect, regardless whether you agree with me or not. What I'm doing is asking you as a county board body that's been acting dysfunctional. And that's the word that I saw Chuck Sweeney of the Rockford Register-Star call this board, and it's also the term I use of the Rockford City Council Board. Please, remind yourselves of that 815 civility mission statement for our community, for you as professionals on the board. And when I say professionals, even though she's not on the board, and I don't know that I've ever met her, Carla, the county administrator. I consider her to be a professional in her own right. I ask all of you to consider her the same. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Next speaker, Terry Pitkus, to talk passenger rail, in favor of passenger rail.
Mr. Chairman, county board members, I thank you for letting me give you a talk. I'm bringing passenger rail service to the Winnebago County area in Rockford. My name is Terry Pitkus. I was born and raised in Winnebago County. I had 37 years in the fire service, 24 of it with the State Fire Marshal's Office as a fire arson investigator. I have 50 years plus of studying railroad operations, procedures, and locations, and tracks and routes. I was on Scott Christensen's original committee back in 2004, 2005 to try to bring passenger rail service. I'm here to ask for your bipartisan support to bring passenger rail service to Rockford in the Winnebago County area. It's an economical, help economical development very much. I'm a supportive of Amtrak and Metra, and there's a difference between Amtrak and Metra. Amtrak will only give one train each direction daily at the beginning, and in the future, depending on the ridership, they will go more. Metra, if we can get them to come to Rockford, will have multiple departures and so forth to the Chicago suburbs and so forth. A week ago, we received information Metra needs Winnebago County Board to approach them and have set up a meeting with our group and do a feasibility study and so forth. And Bert Jarrell will address this more, and I want to thank Bert for all he's done. I've worked with him for the last several months, very interested in this. Also, Metra has built the rail stations in the Chicago area. Amtrak does not. Amtrak will contribute some. Now, a proposed route, right now, that I've suggested to the committees, and it's been accepted, is you come to Elgin, Big Timber, and then from Big Timber, you put a crossover track to the Union Pacific, which will go through Huntley, Marengo, Garden Prairie, Belvedere, Cherry Valley, to Mulford Road. At Mulford Road, a crossover will be built to go to the Canadian National with a station at Mulford Road. Amtrak even is supporting a station at Mulford Road. And then downtown Rockford and South Main, another station. If Metro comes, they'll have to have a yard station or their trains.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pitkus. You're at your 3 minutes, sir. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you. Thank you again, sir. Our next item of business would be meeting minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from January 10th of 2019 and to lay over the minutes from January 24th of 2019. I have a motion by Mrs. Crosby, a second by Mr. Billick, Mrs. Red, Mr. Gurl, excuse me, and any discussion by board members on the minutes before the board. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Minutes adopted. Thank you very much. Announcements and communication. Clerk Gummow.
Mr. Chairman, the items listed below were received as correspondence.
We will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Gummow. Next item of business, board member correspondence. Any comments by board members? I see a couple hands up. We'll start over here with Mr. Salgado.
Yes, I just would like to address county board members and the public. There's been a lot of talks, and I appreciate the state's attorney, Ms. Marilyn Hyatt, on drafting those memos regarding communication between different organizations on one-on-ones. We had a good debate, I believe, in our caucus on Monday, but I just want to reiterate to the public, because I've gotten phone calls, concerns about the same thing as a gentleman that addressed today about the county board being dysfunctional. I just want to say that's completely inaccurate. There's been some stories going around. Yes, there could be controversy or whatever there may be, or some debate amongst us, but I can tell you, rest assured, there isn't any dysfunction. Actually, I think we work pretty well trying to get things passed in the right direction. Maybe we don't like or don't agree on different things on that aspect of it. But I do want to make a point that those organizations that want to reach out to us, if you wouldn't mind just reaching out to the different committees. Like Mr. Nathan Bryant from our ADC laid out 6 different proposals, recommendations. I think those, I sent out an email, I believe. I forwarded to, responded to Mr. Westcott and said, maybe you guys should look into this and put it through committee and kind of decide maybe implement or make changes to that. Same thing with Mr. Einer Forsman, which I highly regard. Same thing, if he feels that there's some issues potentially the way the operations or the structural of the organization itself, maybe it should go through personnel and policies and procedures committee. That's a step that we can go through there. I don't mind people calling me or having conversations, but after we have the conversations, they're all in agreement and saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that really that's what's going on. And they appreciate it and they're cordial about it. But just want to address that, and I want to say thank you to Ms. State's Attorney Marilyn Hyatt on putting that memo out there, so at least everybody understands there's a process and procedure that we can move forward on that. I know there's a lot going on in the air, people saying or assuming or presuming things going on, but hopefully, you know, we'll get through this, be transparent as much as we can, and we'll get there. So I just wanted to you know, address that and also address that to the public as well. So they're aware that we're working on our things. That's why we were elected here by our constituents, to make changes and to move forward. And that's what we're here for. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo my colleague, Mr. Salgado's comments. I would also urge us, and along with Mr. Westcott on his committee, to engage our local partners and have them present something to us that we can look at, amend, and move forward with, or we can change it. But I think the community involvement is huge as far as it goes for government. I believe we're all residents here. We want to see the best for this county and the region. That is why I also have been working with Mr. Pickus, who had just spoke about rail service here. I've spoken with some of our legislators, and I would love to see this body, and especially Mr. Westcott's board or committee, come up with a resolution urging our legislators and our governor to fund this and at least give us an opportunity for this region to advance. We're one of the only regions of this size in the state, and maybe in the local region that doesn't have passenger rail service. And with millennials coming on board, not buying cars, renting more often, we're going to really need an alternate mode of transportation. So I really would urge this board to push forward something and urging our state legislators to take a look at this and not to forget about this region. We have so much to offer. I have a lot of respect for all the board members and this administration, and I think we'll always do the right thing. We might have some non-agreements from time to time, but we are all residents here. It's kind of like hoping for the pilot to crash the plane because you don't like him while you're on board. It doesn't make sense. So I would hope that we can move forward and work together and move this region forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd kind of like to address the board too on a couple of issues, actually. One is, I've been on the board for quite a number of years, and up until recently, I have never seen so many times when someone says, call the question. And when a debate is going on the board floor, and there are hands up, and someone says, call the question, I don't think that's fair, because all the conversation hasn't come out from anybody that wanted to say something. I think this is a habit that only recently has been used, and we inherited that habit, some of us did, from a former board member who always wanted to call the question. And cutting off the debate is just not a good idea, particularly when you might have some information that is pertinent to whatever it is we're debating on. So I guess I'm asking my fellow board members to reserve that action until things are just totally crazy or you've heard everything 3 times over. And so in all the years I've been on this board, I've never made that motion myself, and I've only heard it recently in the past 2 years being used. So the other issue is following up on what Mr. Salgado was saying. I don't think that this board is dysfunctional at all either. I think what you read in the newspaper is what you're getting your information from. I don't believe the newspaper treats this board fairly whatsoever. I think that they take their pot shots every time they can. They might be able to sell 100 more newspapers that day. And today I got bombarded with phone calls, and it's over one of the determinations that came from our state's attorney's office, and it was about speaking at the board. Now, the newspaper would paint it as we're trying to muzzle the chairman. I'm going to tell you that's not it. They're again trying to sell newspapers with a headline like that. It's an ordinance. We have an ordinance. Once again, I've been around for a while. I knew about this ordinance. I've known about it for years. It hasn't really been much of an issue up until recently. So I asked our state's attorney's office for a determination. Several of us have been talking about this for quite some time. So I reached out and asked for the determination on that. So it's in our ordinance. It's in our code. And so we're not creating anything new. We're just firming up what the rules are that we play by. The speed limit says 55 miles an hour. If you go 65, don't complain when that cop gives you a ticket. He's doing his job. He's following his ordinance. And that's all I'm saying, that we should be doing the exact same thing. And I think that some of the reason we got off track so much on some of this stuff is in the last 4 years, we've had a pretty good turnover in board members. 4 years ago, we had some new ones. This year, we had several new ones as well. You don't get a rule book when you get on county board. You kind of learn as you go. Unfortunately, some people, some of our newer board members, and no offense to them, I'm not saying this to degrade anyone, but some of our newer board members are under the impression that the chairman of the board has more power than what he does. And once again, as the state's attorney pointed out to us a couple weeks ago, the board has the power. So we all wear a number of hats, including the chairman. But in this instance here, in this setting here, the chairman's job here is to be a facilitator, moderator, presiding officer, if you will. And because, as correctly pointed out, he is not a board member, then it's not his position to be involved in debates. This is a county board meeting of county board members. Issues come up committee by committee, we debate those among ourselves without outside influence, whether from the chairman's seat or from people in the gallery. Unless, of course, they're part of staff or departments and so forth. And so I want people to remember that, because I got a number of calls today, and I straightened that out once again with some of my constituents, and after I explained that to them, that no, this isn't something new we just cooked up. And they pretty much, when I got done talking to them, they were like Mr. Salgado said, they said, oh gee, thanks, we didn't know that. It looked like in the paper. I said, yes, it looked like it in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other board member comments? Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought maybe I should say a little something here. We need to involve the community on some of these committees. I know we've got one coming up, and I have a member of the community who is very interested in being on this land bank committee. I've sent the resumes to all the county board members and to you, Chairman. I think he outshines anyone on this board. I would appreciate it if you would give him a look and involve the community in this deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rudd. Appreciate it. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, I'll move on to the chairman's report. There's a long list. I'll shoot through them very quickly. In the next probably 4 to 6 weeks, we have a couple of things related to blight reduction. There's going to be an email go out here early next week related to a potential announcement around a community effort around blight reduction. Stay tuned on that. There will also be, in the next month or 5 or 6 weeks, perhaps an overview on our trustee program, our existing trustee program, and some potential opportunities at improving the process. So we'll see where that takes us, but there's a couple more things in addition to the land bank that'll be discussions related to blight reduction and neighborhood revitalization. On the economic development front, I do know we'll have some items that will be continuing to go to the Economic Development Committee. As we talked about now over the last couple of months, the pipeline is full. Some of the opportunities coming to our region are not directly involving the county. Others are in a myriad of ways. It's pretty exciting, and so we're going to have some continued good discussions in the Economic Development Committee in the next few weeks. There's been a little bit of discussion. I'll just talk at a high level. I'm happy to follow up in committee or offline, but just a quick 30-second update on the Regional Planning Council technical assistance hours that are available to the county. The board has approved each of the last, I don't know, several years or at least multiple years commitment to be part of the Regional Planning Council. That's not a new concept. That concept started under the prior administration. There's a number of public entities that belong. Membership in the RPC involves technical assistance hours. To this time, hours used for grant writing, hours used for research by their staff, their professional staff, a population study, the clerk recorder study, and a number of other things where we utilized hours available to the county by their staff as part of membership has been something we've executed on. We certainly can have conversations about hours, about what we've done in the past, about opportunities in the future. The RPC has secured a number of grants for the community, some of which have directly benefited the county, some have gone to other community organizations. We can break that down and talk through that ad nauseum in great detail in committee, whatever that appropriate committee is. The next item, I believe Carla put together, and I'll defer to her on this, some information on host fee. Host fees, I'll just defer to her report, whatever she wants to touch on. E, F, G, and then I'll throw in one other board item. There's a couple boards in town that we have liaisons to. We may appoint to officially, but then we would have a county board member liaison. I did send an email to the board regarding feedback on, number one, the land bank, number two, the rave board, that's the entertainment venues board, that it deals with the BMO Center and the Coronado. The RADC board liaisons, we get 2 spots, not 1, 2. And then the RACVB, the Convention and Visitors Bureau. So looking for any additional feedback, please email me if you have thoughts or interest. Those 3 that I just mentioned are about county board members being liaisons. You may not be an official voting member, but you would be a liaison and could get more engaged in that process. You know, bear with me, I'm getting feedback from multiple inputs on multiple boards. We're not going to be able to go with everybody's suggestion, but we are taking them very seriously. So if you have any additional thoughts, I'm not necessarily taking those tonight here at the board meeting. Please communicate with me, and we're working through those, and we'll get those assigned here in the coming weeks. The last one that's still open, I do see a couple hands up, and I'll get to you, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Webster, in 1 second. We are still taking applications on the Zoning Board of Appeals board position that was vacated by our new board member, Mr. Billick. We have had a couple of applications. That process, I believe, is open through February 15th. Because of that nature of that board, we did send out a press release on that. That would obviously come from a non-county board member. So spread the word if you have any thoughts on that. The window is closing with a 15th deadline, and we'll look to bring forward that recommendation probably at our next board meeting. I know they're antsy to get the vacated position filled. I believe I saw Mr. Webster's hand up first, then Mrs. Gorel, and then I'll finish up on my last 2 items. Mr. Webster.
Yes, thank you. Just 2 quick things. Could we get a list of all of these groups here, RAVE, RADC, RAC board, all of these, could we get a list with the names of the members on those, how many people are on all of those boards and so forth? I would appreciate that. And then I want to thank you for posting that job for Zoning Board of Appeals. We need to get someone on that board post haste. At our most recent meeting, out of a 4 or 7 member board, they had 4 people there. There's 2 on vacation, and then the absence of Mr. Billich. So that created, you know, and when you only have 4 people out of 7 there, that's not really fair to the petitioner, the public, either one. You know, we want to give them the fair shot we can.
Yes, sir. No, thank you, Mr. Webster, and it definitely impacts your committee, the zoning committee of the county board as well. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. If any of you sign up to be liaisons, and you really should, we need to have representation on these boards. Please be sure that you're going to be a person who's going to show up to these meetings. Many times, liaisons are appointed and never show up to meetings. It's truly important that you know that you're going to have the time to attend these meetings and bring that information back to our board. It's vital that we know what's going on, and we're going to be depending on you to do that. So please make sure you have the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gorel. Just 2 quick items today. Related to the minimum wage legislation, you may have heard that the governor signed the minimum wage bill today, or that moved through today. So we are dealing with a reality where there is a new minimum wage law in the state of Illinois. The Park District hosted a legislative update with legislators and some community leaders the other day about the impact to their budget going forward. Our staff, Carla and Molly, are pulling together information in the coming weeks. They need a little time. We'll give them time to talk through financial impact. It doesn't just impact any county worker that is making a minimum wage. Obviously, because of wage compression, it could affect different classifications. Just talking through impact over time will be something we'll be talking about. Staff, I believe, needs a little bit of time, and we'll give them that, but that's certainly going to generate some discussion in the coming weeks and months. Lastly, the much talked about ordinance, you know, in the coming days and weeks, you know, I guess I'd like to look at, let's talk about scenarios in which, you know, offline doesn't have to be officially through board process, but it could be through board committee. Let's talk about scenarios some scenarios in which things touch, they touch a multitude of different parts of the county. Some things don't touch my desk at all. It's all staff and board. Other things touch my desk a little bit, but there's some staff involvement. Other things touch my desk a whole bunch, staff very little, board a lot. Let's start talking through some scenarios so the go forward is very concrete, and that way there's a sense of understanding of where there may be complete alignment and synergy and where there may still be some gaps. I think that will build some comfort level and may also push to the forefront some issues we need to just talk through in the future. I think that'll be a productive way to go forward. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Carla for the County Administrator's Report.
Okay, I'd just like to overview some things that we've been working on. We will have an incentive agreement coming to the next board meeting. Chris Dornbush, myself, and the state's attorney's been working on that. I've been in contact with the company's representative, and they're looking at the agreement right now. The state's attorney had asked the auditor to come up with a plan for the recorder automation fund that had been collecting some fees that actually should go into a county automation fund. They've drafted a recommendation, and we'll be working with finance. They've been busy with audit to get some more details, and then we'll present a plan to the board. This week, Mr. McDonald, the sheriff, Mark Carner, and myself attended a 911 working group meeting with the municipalities. They had provided that day some agreements for us to review because of the short time frame of receiving them and then having the meeting. We're still working through those documents with the state's attorney, and we'll have some recommendations for that group. Their target is to get those agreements through the individual boards in March. And then this week, the state's attorney and I met with Cherry Valley and New Milford. With the Baxter Road area, they had some initial costs that are reimbursable under an IGA that we had entered into with them. They understood that the timing would be such that they wouldn't receive reimbursement right away until the Baxter Road development started generating some revenue. So we're going to work through all the details and try to establish a timeline for them as to when they'll be reimbursed those costs. Today, the tours for the Leopardo review were completed, so hopefully they'll be getting us a plan in the next few weeks that we can present to the board. I'm hopeful they can generate some savings for us to fund some of the capital needs that we have. This week, we also had our exit conference for the audit. Very favorable comments from the auditing firm. Molly and her staff have worked very, very hard on the audit, and it was good to see that we had some good results. This year, we'll complete our CAFR within the 6 months that the GFOA requires, so we won't have an extension this year. And then on your desk, I left some host fee fund documents. We have the projected fiscal year 2019 revenues and expenditures. We project that based on feedback from the landfill, that the host fee revenues will come in at about $4.7 million in fiscal year 19. I pulled together some numbers for multi-year commitments not yet approved, but that will be coming before the board. And then some proposed annual allocations. That's still very much in process. But we feel like we can project that we'll have an excess of revenue over expenditures of about $380,000. We do have the audit numbers for the fund balance for September 30th, 2018 of about $2.9 million. However, we still have that issue with the landfill still out there. And then we would project at the end of fiscal year 19, then our fund balance would be $3.3 million. I also included, again, an updated multi-year commitment worksheet for you that I provided you previously. And then the final document is a history of all the activity in the host fee fund since its inception for your review. I've spoken with Mr. Westcott, the chairman of the Economic Development Committee, and also Jaime Salgado, who's the chair of our finance committee. I've reviewed a few more details with them, and we'll be bringing those forward shortly. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Next item of business, the approval of the consent, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Grill, apologize. Mr. Grill.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a question on this spreadsheet, the third line from the bottom, remaining payments. How does that number correlate with what's on here? Because I'm looking at the AAR and remaining payments, 18 million. The original commitment was 10.9 million. Am I missing something there?
Yeah, something calculated incorrectly. I'll have to get that updated. I apologize.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grill. We'll get that corrected. Any other quick comments before we move on? Seeing none, we will move on to the approval of the consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the raffle report? I have a motion by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you. Can I have a second? Mr. Booker, item is now before the board. Any discussion on the consent agenda, which includes the raffle report? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, standing committee reports, Finance Committee. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has two items. They're both to be laid over, but I'm going to suspend the rules, so I'll start with the first one. I'd like to suspend the rules for Budget Amendment 2019-014, Veterans Assistance Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Salgado, on the motion to suspend the rules, which would allow us to vote this evening, a second by several, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Boomer, and Mr. Girl. The item now is before the board. The item is to suspend the rules or not. A yes vote allows us to suspend and vote tonight. Any discussion before we take the vote to suspend? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, I'd like to move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-014, Veterans Assistance Fund.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. On the motion on the Veterans Assistance Fund, a second by Mr. Girl. Item is now before the board. Any discussion?
I'd like to address that and have Carla.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes, so we, in our committee, we talked to the Veterans Association regarding this. They're looking for a budget amendment of $129,411. There was good discussion on it. What happened was they had two individuals that were treasurers at the time, presidents, I believe, in transition. So there was loss in translation between the budget process. So they found out that their budget was slashed, essentially, basically, from what they were anticipating their budget or their request. So they weren't able to get that information. So there was some miscommunication there along those lines. The big ticket items, they're looking for a van to transport veterans, which was critical. We talked about that in our finance committee. And so there was some other line items. I know there was concerns about running the fund reserves. We talked to them, we addressed that issue about potentially, and by 2020, if they continue to eat into the reserves, they probably will not have any reserves, but they will still have that tax levy, which is about $570,000 a year to operate the facility. So, Carla, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add to that?
Carla?
No, I think you covered what we discussed in committee.
Mr. Salgado, anything else?
Any questions, guys? Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Chairman. How many vehicles do they currently have right now?
I can answer that. I'll ask the gentleman in the back. He's here, and if he could answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any follow-up, Mr. Booker?
Yes. I'd been contacted by a veteran who was concerned about potential audit of this. I know I probably should have, my intention was to have this laid over, and I know that's already done and over with by now, but I was just, some concerns were brought up by the veteran, and I just thought maybe a layover or an audit could have been performed before we went forward with this. That's it.
I'll follow that up. Mr. Booker, Carla, just the process of how the Veterans Assistance Fund is audited annually, so just the process of the books.
The details are not audited. We pay veterans assistance payments from our funds. However, then we pay an allocation of a certain amount over to the Veterans Assistance Commission, and they disperse from their checking account, and we're not aware of those details, and those are not audited.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Neighbors, then Mr. Fellers. Mr. Neighbors.
To my understanding, the vehicle that they already have, wasn't there some, if you could answer me from the back, some stipulations on how they use that van, and getting the van through the county will free up the way they could use the vans to help the veterans?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Does that answer your question, Mr. Neighbors?
Yeah, I just wanted to clear it for the board.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, Mr. Booker, I was just wondering if you had a little bit more detail why you wanted to lay this over. I think this is a point of order. He still could make a motion to lay this over, even though we have suspended the rules. And I'm just sort of curious where your concerns were.
Thank you. Yeah, it has to do with what the expenditures are. Just curious if we could get a worksheet on the expenditures. The veteran that contacted me was concerned about office fees and the vehicle fees and personnel payments and so on. And I believe the veteran has come down and expressed his concern with Carla about just a quick temporary audit, if it could just be laid over, and so that it could be looked at more thoroughly and more deeply.
So if I understand this right, Mr. Booker, you're making a motion. The item is on the floor before the board, and as with any item on the floor before the board, you have a right as a board member to make a motion to lay over. Are you making a motion to lay over this item?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so
will
we
make
have
that motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Booker to lay over the item that is before the board. I would need a second. I have a second by Mr. Kelly and a second by Mr. Fellers. Any discussion on laying over this item? Yes, Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you, Chairman. My concern is what I haven't heard, and Mr. Westcott was saying something to me too about it. I'm concerned about how critical this stuff is for the veterans right now. Is a delay going to cause a problem? I know it's not going to be a long delay, but I was
Yes.
concerned about that.
Okay, and I would ask if there's somebody who could speak to timing. I know this was an issue at the last meeting when we had an item about layover, and there was concern about whether or not we could take a question related to timing. I'm going to allow that because I want there to be clarity on the floor so that we understand if we lay something over, does it impact timing? Is there somebody who could speak to timing, whether that's Mr. Salgado, Carla, or a gentleman in the back, of if this laid over? And
I would just yield my time to the gentleman in the back, if he can answer that.
go ahead, sir. I'm going to have you. Thank you very much. That's the best I'm seeing that we can answer that particular question. So if we laid it over, I'm not seeing that it would, I'm not seeing any other comments towards that. Mr. Grill?
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my question is if this lays over or whether it doesn't. I think the veterans, I think they've displayed the need for the van and the need for the service. The audit is something that we can do while they are still transporting veterans, and if we do find something, then we can make that action at that time. But to lay it over and to neglect people the care that they deserve and that they absolutely deserve for what they did for us and our country, I just don't see the point of it. I see the point that Mr. Booker has made about the audit, and I believe that any agency that receives money from us or is connected with this county should be audited, and those revenues and expenditures should match. I have full faith in our auditor and our county administrator and our outside auditor to fulfill this. I just don't see the need to lay it over. I see the need for the audit, just so that people can understand what's going on and clear up any questions, but I don't see the need for the layover. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grill. The item before the board is to lay over, is whether or not to lay over the Veterans Fund. Yes, Carla?
I just want to make it clear that I don't oversee the spending of the funds once it goes to the Veterans Assistance Commission. Once we write them their allocation check, we have no idea how it's spent, and our external auditors do not review that.
Thank you. We have a follow-up by Mr. Fellers. The item before the board is the layover, so we're focused on whether the layover itself. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the question is it reasonable to expect that any sort of brief audit or temporary audit of their books could be done in a 2-week time period so that we could take this up at the next board meeting?
Carla, any thoughts on that?
I believe our county auditor could probably assist us pretty quickly with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. The item before the board, a yes vote would allow us to lay this over. A no vote would not lay it over, and that would bring the item right back before the board for a potential, approval this evening.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Mr. Salgado.
the only reason why I wanted to push this forward was because it was unanimously passed through our committee, and that's why, typically we give the benefit of the doubt that way when it's passed through unanimously.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. I see 2 hands up, Mr. Arena, then Mr. McDonald. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about laying this over for just 2 weeks or possibly longer?
It would lay over to the next board meeting, and then it would be in the hands of the board at that time. That's typically, all layovers are the same in that regard.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I spoke to this as well in the committee. I shared that I'm also a veteran, so I don't want to come out as anti-veteran, but there's several other charities and causes out there that are very top-heavy and organizationally, and I'm worried about us being in that situation as well. This, from what I understand, is a basically one-time expenditure to get their van. I told them that I would support it this time, but we cannot continue down this path. And because of that, I would urge that we can pass this evening.
So the item before the board again is the layover this evening. A yes vote would allow us to lay it over, and it would come back to us in 2 weeks. A no vote would put the item right back before the board for action this evening. Any further questions related to the layover? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on this one. A yes vote would lay it over.
Mr. Hoffman? No. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald? No. Mr. Neighbors? No. Mrs. Red? No. Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Schultz? Yes. Mr. Tassoni? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Westcott? No. Mr. Arena? Yes. Mr. Billich? No. Mr. Boomer? No. Mr. Booker? Yes. Mr. Butita? No. Mrs. Crosby? Yes. Mr. Fellers? Yes. Mr. Fiducia? No. Mr. Gurl? No. Mrs. Gurl? No. Six yes, 12 no.
Motion to lay over fails, so the item is back before the board, and that's the approval of the budget amendment for the Veterans Assistant Fund is before the board for action this evening. Any other questions or comments by board members before we take the vote on this action item? Yes, sir, Mr. Schultz.
I'm sorry, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do believe that there has to be some protocol where veterans assistance organizations such as ours have some kind of review of their books. And so just an understanding of how that happens, who does it, what's the structure. If it's elective, if it's something that's up to the individual commission, I would strongly urge that we begin a process of having an annual review of their books. I think it will help them as it relates to any outside scrutiny or questions around the management of those funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. Follow up by Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say I actually agree with Mr. Schultz. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Chairman.
Mr. Gurl. Yes, Mr. Salgado.
Yes, there's a lot of questions, Mr. Schultz. The first time that came out brought up good points, questions on the expenditures. Not to defend them on that aspect of it. We did have good conversation at our Finance Committee regarding their organizational structure. They were going through two different presidents at the time. Not saying that this is why it was presented this way, but it was, from my understanding, was that they were going to reach out to Carla's department and the finance to work. So there is good record keeping, especially when it comes down to the budget, making sure that we get what we need in order to make the best decision for the organization and for the county. So that was addressed at the Finance Committee level. I can attest to that. That's the conversation we had. So I'm not to defend them on any situation. I do agree we should be auditing. We should make sure that everything is tied up and that it makes sense and that the taxpayers' money is going to the good use, like individuals like in the back that is a veteran that are using, the facility. So I appreciate that, and I just wanted to echo that.
Thank you very much. So the item before the board is the budget amendment related to Veterans Assistant Fund. I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Kelly? Mr. McDonald? Yes. Mr. Neighbors? Yes. Mrs. Red? Yes. Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz? Yes. Mr. Tassoni? Yes. Mr. Webster? Yes. Mr. Webscott? Yes. Mr. Arena? Yes. Mr. Billich? Yes. Mr. Boomer? Yes. Mr. Booker? Yes. Mr. Butita? Yes. Mrs. Crosby? Yes. Mr. Fellers? Yes. Mr. Fiducia? Yes. Mr. Gurl? Yes. Mrs. Gurl? Yes. Mr. Hoffman? Yes. All ayes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Clerk Gumau. Unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Next item of business, we'll go back to Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last item we have on the agenda is Budget Amendment 2019-016, Sheriff's Drone Grant, and I would like to suspend the rules.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules on the drone, a second by Mr. McDonald, Mr. Westcott, and a second also by Mr. Gurl. Item is now before the board. The item is to suspend the rules on a yes vote. No vote, the item would automatically lay over. Any discussion by board members? All those in favor of laying this item over signify by saying aye. Are there any opposed? Yes, sir. I misspoke very clearly, and thank you that 20 people caught my mistake, because that was a big mess up. The item is to suspend the rules. A yes vote this evening, right now, would allow us to suspend the rules, which would allow us to take action tonight. So a yes vote allows us to suspend the rules. Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz, for correcting me. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, we're going to suspend the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, I'd like to speak to this. Essentially, this is a drone for $10,450.
Mr. Salgado, I'll ask you to make a motion,
I'm
and then
sorry.
we'll get it, and then
Yep,
I'll
yep.
turn it right over to you.
So I move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-016, the Sheriff Drone Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Salgado motions the drone. May I have a second? A second by several people, Mr. Booker, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. McDonald, and I believe Mr. Girl as well. Item is now before the board, and I'll go back to Mr. Salgado to speak to it.
Yes, I apologize for that. So this is a grant, it's neutral. It's $10,000, $450. So it was a grant by the Community Foundation Northern Illinois. It's essentially 2 drones, 2 hard cases, 2 iPad controllers, 2 landing pads, 2 kits, and it's for the crime scene technician to be used for this. And so since it's budget neutral, we should pass this. Thank you.
And it was unanimous out of committee?
Yes, it was.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Item before the board is the drone. Any discussion by board members? Any questions? Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully with these drones, the sheriff can see the value of these, and maybe they can assist us with missing persons, so we don't have to call in helicopters and accrue all those expenses that are associated with a large search. These drones can go out there and accomplish that really quick with the tools that we have already with the K9s. And the addition to the 2 bloodhounds, this is just a great thing for the community as a whole, and for the sheriff, and then for the safety of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grill. Any other comments by board members before we vote? Seeing none, and since I believe there's pretty good support here, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. I'll go back to, Mr. Webster on a follow-up, but we have passed that item. We're moving on. Mr. Webster.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to back up a click there to item number 2 on there. I just want to say, after a healthy discussion about the Veterans Assistance thing, I'm very proud that this dysfunctional board came together and voted to help out the veterans. Thank all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Salgado, anything else?
Yes, just one last thing about the host fee funds. I kind of talked to Carl a little bit with Mr. Westcott, looking at our reserves, to maybe looking at taking some of that money and investing it in, to earn more interest on it, and to set aside maybe $1 million worth at 6% return, $60,000 a year would probably help us out and build some reserves as well. And there was a couple other items about a policy potentially for not approved funds that are out there, to ensure that there is some sort of form to go a process through, and have some sort of policy for, just like different businesses that come to us that need assistance through economic and host fee funds. So we'll look into that and get more information to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Next item of business, Zoning Committee. Mr. Webster. Do you want to turn on?
Oh, I thought he was coming up.
Thank you. We have no report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Where's Mr. Westcott?
I'll make it easy, no report.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McDonald is coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee has a few items before you this evening. The first is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute a First Amendment to an intergovernmental agreement for information technology support services with Rockford Housing Authority.
So we have a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution related to the IGA, IT IGA with the RHA. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Butita, Mrs. Gorel, and Mrs. Red. The item is now before the board for discussion. Any questions or comments by board members on this ITIGA with the Rockford Housing Authority? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 3, resolution adopting the 5 shared organizational values for Winnebago County. That didn't come out of committee, so we're not going to bring that before you this evening.
Thank you.
Number 4, resolution to change hours of the county clerk's office on Election Day.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution to change the hours of the clerk on Election Day. May I have a second, please? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Girl on the second. Item is now before the board for discussion. Any comments, questions by board members? Yes, Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering if we were going to use some of our employees, maybe from the recorder's office, if there is the need to fill those positions or to add any extra help. So I would hope if we do need that maybe that we can use some of those employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Any other discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last thing we have tonight is resolution encouraging the Illinois General Assembly to amend 55 ILCS 5/3-9008 of the county's code regarding appointment and payment of special prosecutor.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution related to the General Assembly code regarding the appointment and payment of a special prosecutor. May I have a second on that motion? I got a second by Mr. Boomer and Mr. Arena. Item is now before the board. Would somebody like to speak with this just to bring clarity to this item? Mr. Arena? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this was motivated by the conversations we had regarding payment to the special prosecutor that the sheriff obtained. In the judge's ruling, she specified how we should pay it, and that seemed problematic. That wasn't, we felt the role of the court to be dictating that. In investigating our options, I talked to the Illinois State Association of Counties. They said they really can't engage the issue unless we pass a resolution authorizing it, that we desire it. This resolution would not affect any change. It would just be a request to our state legislators and the Association of Counties to possibly have a sentence added to the existing statute that says the payment for attorney's fees or litigation expenses shall be made from the funding source the county determines to be appropriate. So it would become our discretion on how it's paid. I did meet with Sheriff Caruana and explain this to them. It doesn't have any effect on what is currently happening, and he agreed that he wouldn't be opposed to it, and I thought that was very gracious of him. So I can take any questions anyone has about it, if there's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any questions or comments on this resolution before the board? Mr. Groh.
Thank you again, Chairman. Would this not come from our state's attorney to petition the court at that time that the judgment was made by the courts, or am I missing something? That just seems like the job of the our attorneys or the state's attorney to actually petition the court at that time when the decision was made and appeal that decision. I'm not sure if actually amending the code downstate would help us or hurt us, but I was just wondering if I can get opinion from the state's attorney on that process. Thank you.
I'll go to the state's attorney. I think we're talking two different issues, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the amendment to the state statute, it would clarify and basically direct the court that they cannot dictate how the county board decides to pay an invoice that's mandated by the court. The prior situation, and you're correct, if we disagree with how the court has imposed an order, we have 30 days to file an appeal. And so what the amendment would do is to make it very clear to the court, you have the legislative, you have the judiciary, you have the executive. And Mr. Arena did speak to myself and Mr. Kurlinkus regarding this matter. And what I had indicated to him is whenever it is open, the courts usually will say the legislature should resolve it. So if it is added to the state statute, it could shorten the process if there's a disagreement about an order that's issued by the court directing the county board how to spend county funds, which I believe is inappropriate. I think that decision has to remain with the county board, because if the court can direct the county board how to administer funds, and they've crossed over into that legislative area. So.
Thank you, State's Attorney Height Ross. A follow-up, Mr. Girl?
Thank you for clarifying that. I absolutely agree that the separation of the three powers of government should stay that way, just as we have learned in the past that we cannot tell the judicial branch of government what to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grill. Any other comments by board members on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you again, Mr. Arena, for that. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes our report. Thank you.
Next item of business, Public Works Committee. Yes, we'll go back to Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to give kudos to Keith McDonald. The recent meeting of the 911 working group, I talked to several of the powers to be in my district. You realize I have like 5 precincts in my district, a number of smaller communities. So I reached out to all of them to ask them the same question. I said, what was your takeaway from the meeting when you went to there? And so, because I'm concerned about the culmination of all of this, right? So at any rate, they specifically said, thank you to Board Member McDonald for attending that. They appreciated someone from the county board being there. And then what I got from them, almost universally from all of them when I asked them that question, is they feel that they're getting pretty close. They all feel that the county has been doing a good job of bringing things together now on our part, our part in this role, and almost universally they all said, you know, things are going so much smoother than they were when we started this process, because, man, we were everywhere, right? All the communities weren't on the same page or anything. And so and so then they talked about getting close to ironing out the details, the fees, the RMS, the CAD system, all these things that you're more familiar with than I. And they gave high praise, I must say, they gave high praise to the sheriff and to Mark Connor and to our administrator, Ms. Paschal, for the work that they've been doing and for your attendance there. And then finally, they mentioned there, I wrote all these notes, I got them scribbled down here. Finally, they said that perhaps next week they might be able to finalize this. If not next week, the end of the month. They're hoping, shooting for that, and they're hoping that the chairman will join them at that meeting, because you're the one that would sign it, the agreement?
I would sign the agreement, thank you, Mr. Webster. I would sign the agreement after the county board approves it, but yes, we're close. There's been some good work over a long period of time. Mr. Booker and Mr. Girl also are the second and third board member who have attended at various times, but no, I agree with you. And I'm not exactly sure when the next meeting is, but I do plan to be there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. McDonald on a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to quickly follow up on that. We were pushed to try to have something ready, I think, for Friday. We met with the State's Attorney's Office, not enough time for them to review what needs to be done. We are doing great things. The next opportunity, we're going to get on the schedule and at least meet with finance and operations, possibly others, but you guys will all hear more information and get the details probably by the next committee cycle. This seems accurate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. We're going to a direction where everybody that is going to be participating will be paying and it'll be an equitable model, and there's going to be a version of a shared governance model that appears to be working, and there has been good work done by a lot of folks over a long period of time here at the county and with the other municipalities. So very excited about that as well. I apologize if I saw a hand up and I missed it. Thank you, Mr. Webster, for bringing that up and for adding to that, Mr. McDonald. Any other quick discussion before we move off of public safety? Or, excuse me, operations. Next item of business would be the Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We bring forth no resolutions tonight, but I do have a little bit of comments and correspondence. Basically, I think it's no secret to anybody, the winter we've had in the last 30 days, and basically 90% of our annual snowfall has came in the last 30 days. And I would just give a commend to all our employees and staff of our various, villages, townships, counties, and as well as our city for the efforts that their employees have given through this, ice, snow, and whatnot. A lot of them were presented with a no-win situation. We've heard of salt shortages and the inability to, get the roads down to bare pavement. But with that, I would just commend all those that are doing the best, countless hours of overtime and work with no sleep, trying to do the best they can. And with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Molina from the Highway Department to give us a little briefing on where our Highway Department stands.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Carlos?
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Just wanted to give you a quick report or where we are with salt. We have used just over 11,000 tons this past winter. And like Mr. Tassoni said, most of it has come this last month. Just to give you an idea, we've had about 30 snow events, snow and ice events, and we use about 400 tons average per event. We have, as of yesterday, we had 3,000 tons in stock in different locations that we had throughout the county, and by the end of Saturday, I expect to have about 5,000 tons. That's a pretty good amount, and I think we're going to be okay. It has been a slow delivery process. It just takes a long time for the trucking companies to get the salt to us. But I think this week I'm feeling pretty good about it. However, we have gone over the salt budget. We had to place an order just this past couple days of about another 2,000 tons, so that we, that we should have it in stock, and that's what we're getting this week. The amount that we have gone over is about $160,000. However, on overtime, because a lot of the snow events we have been working during the day, as far as the overtime goes, we are about 25% of what we budgeted for this fiscal year. Again, another fact or figure that I want to give you is it cost us, or the county, about $45,000 per event, average. That includes salt, fuel, and payroll or overtime. Lastly, again, just to give you an idea, last winter we used about 13,000 tons. The winter before, 9,000. And the winter before that, 7,500. So we had some mild winters. This has not been so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your hard work. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other items, sir? I take that as a no. You're good. Okay, sorry about that. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No report at this time. I will be in touch with committee members for our March committee meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report, but I do have animal stories. Your animal services had 589 calls. They took 102 dogs, 68 cats, 1 ferret, 3 rabbits, not 1 but 12 tropical fish. They rescued 3 dogs, 3 cats, and 1 ferret. We've adopted 39 dogs, 47 cats, and 2 rabbits. That makes a total of about 71 in population for dogs and about 21 for cats, which is a very good cost savings for the county. And I'm sure that Mr. Hoffman could go out there and adopt a couple fish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. Next item of business, unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Next item of business, new business. We have Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just responding back to item 5 of out of operations, while we don't exactly have any lobbyist or representation downstate, I think it would be worthy of this board to reconvene the ad hoc Legislative Affairs Committee so that we can again put together our list of legislative priorities for this coming session. It seems that the wheels of politics in Springfield are rather greased right now, and we actually might be able to get some of our legislators to get some of our priorities through this year. Thank you.
We'll note that. Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Next item of business, new business. So there's some logistics here we're working out, and want to be clear on the board floor. I'm going to be nominating Mr. Butita for the Northern Illinois Land Bank trustee position. That, because of some language that is in the IGA on the land bank side, not on the county side, calls for a resolution. Since it calls for a resolution, it needs to touch committee. So we're going to send that, although appointments never go to committee, they always start on the board floor. We're going to send that to committee here, I believe, next week, and then to the board back here in a couple of weeks for approval. And so that'll be coming. Thank you, Mr. Butita, for being game to serve. One of the things that weighed heavily in my recommendation to this board for consideration, it goes around the fact there was a number of opinions related to policy development and a number of divergent opinions even in this room. And one of the things I appreciate about Mr. Butita, he wanted to hear from board members so that when and if he becomes a board member for the trustee for this land bank, that he can take those thoughts from you all and from others and be part of the policy development phase, including your opinions, not exclusive of your opinions. So that'll be a discussion that'll go to committee and then back to the board in a couple of weeks. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn by Mr. Fellers, second by Mr. Butita. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.